everyone. In today's video, I'm going to be touching on different tips and tricks that I have learned for the several years of airbrushing. And I want to talk to you about preventing clogs, how I go about cleaning my airbrush, and I will even go into my own personal setup. Okay, so most of these tips are going to be very double action airbrush centric. And for those that don't know what double action is, so basically when you press the trigger, that is going to release the air. And as you pull back, it's going to release the paint. Depending on how hard you pull back is going to depend how much paint goes through the airbrush. As far as a single action airbrush, once you press down on that trigger, it's gonna start spewing paint right away. Okay, so one of the best habits that I have kind of taken on is making sure that I use the paint that's in the cup before sitting it aside and letting it sit, and then I get involved in something else. So if there's too much liquid while I'm doing the project and I don't need that color anymore, I will dump it back into the original cake it came from. And this is kind of another advantage of creating your own airbrush paints from body paint cakes as opposed to using the liquids, because it's really easy just to kind of dump and go instead of having to open a bottle back up and dump it in. So if you aren't familiar with that technique that I use, I do have another video that you might want to check out, and it can save not having to buy a bunch of airbrush colors. So when I do use alcohol activated colors, I will empty the cup and then I will put some 99% alcohol and spray that through, just to make sure that the components are kind of cleared and there's no color in there. Because if I set it aside, these colors, once they dry, can be a little more problematic than, say, like the water activated colors. Okay, so let's get a little more into clogging. Always the worst when you're in the middle of the process, getting into the groove, and then all of a sudden it won't spray. Sometimes you can just up the air pressure on your compressor or open up the airbrush some more and you can clear that clog. It could be something as simple as just some of the pigment kind of clumped and collected somewhere within the system. Now, another culprit would be tip dry. So tip dry happens while, as you're working, the product is starting to dry around the opening of the airbrush. This is something that you most likely can clear with a cotton swab. What you're going to want to do is, depending on what paint you're using, if you're using water activated, then go ahead and use water. If it's alcohol activated, you're definitely going to want to use alcohol for this. So you're just going to soak a Q-tip with either the water or the alcohol and gently just kind of twirl it around the front. And this is going to reactivate that paint and help to clear it. You just want to be careful not to put too much pressure because you don't want to damage the tip of that needle. So a good habit to get into with the double action airbrush is, as you're painting, don't just let the trigger go. So what you're going to want to do is come back forward so it's no longer releasing paint, but still keep your finger down so air is coming through. This way, the air can carry any excess paint that might still be along the needle. And this also helps to clear the front end, so you're less likely to get tip dry. Okay, so another culprit of clogging that I had experienced is specifically with side feed cups. There's been many times where I was cleaning it and it's not working. Everything seemed fine. Well, come to find out, the culprit was actually the cup itself. You're going to want to remove the cup and make sure that that opening is clear of any kind of paint remnants. Just take a wet Q-tip and twirl it around and pull up any of that pigment. Now, as for the cup itself, this particular one does unscrew at the bottom, so I'm just going to go ahead and take that off, and you can see there's the paint. Now, not all cups will do this, but I'm just showing this just in case you do have this type of airbrush. Now for the narrow part of the cup, I use these little dental scrubbers. They're pretty awesome. I got these from Daiso, so they're super cheap. And they're great to get into those tight spots and get all that paint out of there. Over the years, I have taken my airbrush apart a lot more because I would get like catastrophic clogs. But as my experience has grown, I have become much better at avoiding cloggage and not having to resort to disassembling the whole thing. Because taking it apart is just going to start to wear out the parts and wear out the threading. I don't use regular airbrush cleansers because they're not really made for cosmetics. They're made for harsher acrylics and enamel type paints. And plus two, why spend the money? I can just use 99% alcohol and it cleans my airbrush just as good. If you are using a silicone-based makeup system like MAC or Temp 2, I do know they come with cleaners, and I would recommend using those cleaners. I'm talking more about, like, I'm not going to use Createx airbrush cleaner when I'm just spraying Mayron through my airbrush. With water activated makeups, I'll usually just run some water through and then use some alcohol at the end just for good measure. And I'll just load the cup up and spray it till it's clear. And if there's any color in the cup, what I'll do is I'll just take a brush with either alcohol or water. If it's the water activated, water works fine. And just kind of use the brush to scrub sides of the cup, just like that until it's clear. And then if it's really, really dirty, I'll just dump this out. If it's not that dirty, and then I'll just spray it through till it's clear. I also may back flush the airbrush a few times. Now let's talk about back flushing. So that is basically the act of letting pressure go through your airbrush and blocking the front so the air pressure is pushed back and coming out of the cup. Now, this method is also used to mix paints within the cup. I don't necessarily recommend doing it because it can cause paint to go into areas that you do not want in your airbrush, and then you will have to take it apart because it's been back flushed into the trigger area or other areas it shouldn't be. But this method is something that I do like to use when cleaning, because sometimes it may seem like it's all sprayed through and you might back flush it and it jars loose a little more pigment, and it's just kind of a little extra thing to do while cleaning. Okay, so now let's get into my personal setup. And full disclaimer, I am not sponsored by any of these companies. They are just what I have come to like. So getting an airbrush set up can seem a little daunting. And the one thing I do recommend, if you're going to invest, I would invest heavier on the actual airbrush side versus paying for a $300 compressor. And also, don't feel like you have to buy the super expensive airbrushes. It took me a while before I switched to Iwata, which is predominantly what I use now. I started out with cheaper end airbrushes, and Pache is a great company that I liked. So don't feel like you can't try out airbrushing unless you spend all that money on a more expensive airbrush. Okay, so let's talk about that cheap compressor. So as far as compressors, I am on my third one in 13 years. I used to airbrush Illustrate, and the compressor would be running for hours and it would overheat and conk out. And I had burned out expensive compressors. So the most important feature that I have found when looking for a compressor is you're going to want to make sure it has a cutoff feature. This means that when it gets up to a certain air pressure, it will stop running. Now, I've had models that just continuously run, and I have burnt those out real quick. So having the shutoff feature is really going to make sure that your compressor is going to last longer because it's not going to be working as hard. Now, I use a $70 compressor from Harbor Freight. Been using this specific one for 5 years now, and it's still a rock star. The one thing is, if you do get a compressor such as this, you might find that you do have to find some adapters to make sure that your hose attaches properly to it. So I did have to get an adapter for it that wasn't at Harbor Freight. Okay, so a few accessories that I would recommend is the Grex micro air valve. I love this little guy. So essentially what it does, when you're airbrushing and you want to control the pressure of the airbrush, you just move this little valve. You don't have to finagle with the compressor, which I keep on the floor. So if I'm working, that's just gonna be a nightmare. So this is nice because it's right there. I love this little guy. You can turn the air pressure all the way up, and you can even shut it all the way down. The great thing I like about it is that you can swap between airbrush really easily and fast. And also, if you have multiple brands, you don't have to worry about if the connection is gonna be the right size to match the hose. This will streamline it so that they all have that same piece that's just going to go right into your quick connect. And you don't have to get the Grex micro valve to get the advantage of the quick connect. You can just get the quick connect connected to the hose and just call it a day. So a cordless airbrush might be something you want to look into if you're really not looking to spend that much money on a setup, or you have limited space and you're not really sure if you want to do the whole commitment of a full setup. These are actually pretty handy. You just go ahead and plug it into the wall, it charges it, and then it's ready to go. I got this off of Amazon, and it's fairly inexpensive. I hope you found all this information useful. If there's any further questions you have, please let me know in the comments, and maybe I will make a third airbrush video if there is something else you want me to discuss a little further. I will be working on a bald cap video on how I create my own latex bald caps, so that will be coming out soon. But if there is another technique of something that you want a little more in-depth talk about, please let me know too in the comments. Thank you so much for hanging out, and I will see you next time.